Chapter 4 Shadow of Vengeance. Ray stood amidst the carnage, his body trembling as adrenaline surged through him. Around him lay the twisted, lifeless bodies of cartel men, their faces contorted in agony, mouths open in silent screams. Blood soaked the earth, glistening under the pale moonlight. The air was heavy with the metallic scent of death. Ray's fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white, his chest heaving with ragged breaths. He felt a chill in the air, colder than the night should have been, a darkness that seemed to pulse around him. Tezcatlipoca's voice echoed in his mind, dark and commanding yet somehow soothing. Finish it. End him. Ray's gaze snapped up, his eyes locking onto Hector, who was backed against the wreckage of a truck, a pistol trembling in his hand. His once confident face was pale, eyes wide with terror. He had thrown aside his handkerchief during the chaos, revealing the cruel, scarred face Ray remembered all too well. The face of the man his mother left them for, the man who tore his family apart. Hector's voice was a shaky whisper. I knew I shouldn't have hired you. You're just like her. Weak, a burden, should have left you both in the dirt. The words cut deep, igniting a fire within Ray's chest. His vision flickered, darkness creeping in at the edges. He could feel Tezcatlipoca's influence washing over him, the urge to tear Hector apart to make him suffer. Yes, feel that rage. He deserves to suffer. He's the reason for your pain. Ray's fists trembled, the shadows around him swirling with anticipation. His muscles tightened, every nerve in his body screaming for action, for vengeance. The air grew colder, the shadows around his feet twisting, coiling like serpents. He could feel them reaching for him, feeding off his anger, urging him to give in. He took a step forward, his eyes blazing with fury. Hector's back pressed against the metal, nowhere to run. He raised his pistol, his arm trembling. Stay back, you monster. Ray hesitated, the word cutting through the haze. Monster. He glanced down at his hands, shaking, bloodied. The bodies scattered around him, mangled and broken, faces frozen in horror. He had done this. A flash of memory, his fists flying, unstoppable, uncontrollable, breaking Vargas's face, ending his career, ending his life. I can't. Ray choked, his voice raw, shaking his head. I won't be that monster again. You are not a monster, Ray. You are justice. You are vengeance. Ray could feel Tezcatlipoca's rage boiling beneath the surface, seething, clawing to be unleashed. His body was tense, muscles straining as he fought to regain control. He took another step back, his hands trembling, the shadows swirling angrily around his feet. I won't do it, Ray said, his voice firmer this time, eyes narrowing. I won't give in to you. The shadows around him shuddered, twisting unnaturally, before lashing out, wrapping around his limbs like snakes. Ray gasped, his body locking up as cold, numbing darkness seeped into his skin. Foolish mortal. Tezcatlipoca's voice was colder, crueler. You think you have a choice? Ray's head snapped back, his eyes rolling as shadows poured into his mouth, filling his lungs with cold fire. He felt his body moving without his will, his limbs jerking unnaturally as he took a step toward Hector, then another. His vision flickered, darkness enveloping his mind. Hector fired his pistol, the bullet piercing Ray's shoulder. He didn't feel it. Tezcatlipoca's laughter echoed in his head, twisted and mocking. Pathetic. He thinks he can stop me? Ray's hands flexed, his lips curling into a snarl that wasn't his own. He lunged forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat, his movements faster, more fluid. Hector's eyes widened, his mouth opening in a silent scream as Ray's hands wrapped around his throat, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. Ray wanted to scream to stop himself, but his body wasn't his to control. Tezcatlipoca's voice was triumphant, savage. This is justice. This is vengeance. This is who you are. With a sickening crack, Ray's grip tightened, his hands moving with inhuman strength. Hector's body went limp, his head lolling uselessly as his lifeless eyes stared into the void. The world was silent, the air heavy with death and shadows. Ray staggered back, the darkness retreating, his vision clearing. His body felt cold, heavy, like he was drowning. He looked down at his hands covered in Hector's blood. He stumbled backward, his legs giving out as he collapsed to his knees, his stomach twisting with nausea. He retched, his body shaking uncontrollably. No, I I didn't mean to. Oh, but you did. Tezcatlipoca's voice was softer now, almost soothing. You wanted him dead. I merely granted your wish. Ray's head snapped up, his eyes burning with fury. You did this. You made me. I gave you the power. You chose to use it. You chose to seek vengeance. The shadows coiled around Ray, whispering, tempting. And it felt good, didn't it? To punish the one who wronged you, to make him suffer? Ray shook his head, his breath ragged. No, I didn't want this. Lies. Tezcatlipoca's laughter echoed, mocking. You were born for this. You are my vessel, my harbinger. Embrace it, Ray. Embrace who you truly are. Ray looked at the bodies scattered around him, at Hector's lifeless form, at the blood on his hands. He was a monster, and he didn't know if he would ever be able to escape it. Lazarus Research Facility, Yucatan, Mexico. The sterile hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an eerie glow on the rows of containment chambers lining the lab. The air smelled of antiseptic and something else, something unnatural, something wrong. At the center of it all, a lone figure moved with quiet precision. Dr. Bordeaux. His name carried weight in Lazarus's deepest circles, whispered in the corridors of laboratories where science had long since abandoned morality. Bordeaux was not just a scientist. He was an architect of something far beyond human comprehension. His work had redefined life, death, and everything in between. The 9 experiments. His gloved fingers traced the surface of a reinforced containment pod. Inside, suspended in a thick luminescent liquid, was his latest experiment, a body once broken, now whole, a life once extinguished, now rekindled. But it was not merely life he had restored. No, this was something more, something unnatural. Bordeaux's thin lips curled into a faint smile. You should be grateful, he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of a god addressing his creation. Few get a second chance at existence. The assistant standing behind him swallowed nervously. He had seen what had happened to the previous test subjects. Not all of them survived the infusion. Most of them didn't remain human. Sir, the assistant said cautiously, are you certain this one will hold? Bordeaux didn't turn. His gaze remained fixed on the swirling darkness within the containment pod. It wasn't just fluid. It pulsed, moved, coiled like a living thing. Nyx matter. The substance defied explanation. It was ancient, predating recorded history, a force of pure entropy. Bordeaux had spent years studying it, refining it, bending it to his will, but it did not obey easily. It was alive in ways science could not define. It whispered, it devoured, it corrupted. But in the right vessel, it could create something unstoppable. This one is different, Bordeaux said finally, his voice eerily calm. He was strong in life. His soul already carried the weight of violence, of ambition. The Nyx matter will shape him accordingly. The assistant hesitated, eyes flickering toward the readings on the monitor. And if it doesn't? The doctor turned, his sharp, piercing gaze locking onto the assistant's. Then he will be discarded like the others. Bordeaux watched in fascination, his eyes gleaming with a manic light. You were dead the moment they dragged you out of that ring. But now you'll be reborn. You'll be perfect. Silence settled over the room as the chamber's interior shifted. The dark fingers of Nyx matter curled around the subject's limbs, seeping into the flesh, binding to it, consuming it. For a long moment nothing happened. Then, a violent tremor shook the pod. The monitors blared warning signals. The body inside twitched, convulsed, and then the eyes snapped open, 2 glowing orbs of spectral blue, burning with unnatural energy. The assistant stumbled back. The pod exploded outward. Glass and liquid sprayed across the lab, the force of it sending equipment crashing to the floor. The assistant barely managed to dive out of the way as a figure emerged from the smoking remains of the containment pod. Mateo Vargas was reborn. His body moved unnaturally, almost weightless, as if unbound by the laws of the physical world. His once brown eyes had been replaced with an eerie, ghostly glow, and his breath came in slow, measured rasps. He flexed his fingers, watching as wisps of shadow coiled between them. Bordeaux stepped forward, completely unfazed by the destruction. He observed his creation with clinical detachment, tilting his head slightly. Tell me, Vargas, he said smoothly, do you remember who you were? For a long moment, Vargas said nothing. Then slowly a grin stretched across his face, one far too wide, far too unnatural. I remember everything, Vargas replied, his voice a ghostly whisper. Bordeaux's smile widened. Good, he murmured. Then let's begin.